guys very much from the Fire Safety Council for hosting this. Thank you guys for coming out. Uh, my partner Rex and I do a lot of different things around the county, and my other partner Mike Cornett is up here in the front, public information for Cal Fire San Diego, and so it's the guy who's updating the social media and talking on the news and all that stuff. So we do our best to get you good information. We heard some stuff from Jeff Murdoch about the evacuations and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do is kind of take us a step back, talk big picture about how we get to that point where we're doing the evacuations, what that looks like. We'll leave you with some action items, answer any questions that you have along the way. So fire season, as you guys may have noticed, is kind of getting longer and longer. Fire season is kind of a weird thing to say anymore. For years we've said that we have a fire year down here. What's happening is we become driven by the weather. The weather really drives everything that we do. So when we don't have that rain, we have what a lot of us know and love out here in San Diego County is that beautiful chaparral community, all that brush. The challenging part for us is that in the fall is the most challenging time for us because it's all dried out. It's had all spring and summer to dry out. So the fuels are ready to burn. As we'll talk about here in a minute, these are the three main factors that drive wildland fire behavior. So we're talking disaster, but let's talk about wildland fire for a second because this is really, we know that when it comes to disasters here in San Diego County, this is usually the big one. So topography, fuel, and weather. Topography, the up and downs, the hills, the slopes, everything like that drives the fire behavior. It can channel the winds in the direction sometimes towards your property. Fire runs a lot faster uphill, and so what happens is these fires go to the base, and once it gets to the climb, it's able to preheat all those fuels in front of it. All those hot gases are going up that slope, and it kind of makes sense if you think about it. The fire's down here, it now hits a slope. All those hot gases are right there, ready to burn, and so you'll see fire race uphill very quickly. That will drive fire behavior. The fuel conditions and topography not changing significantly in our lifetime, right? So what we have here throughout California is some significant terrain, some significant topographical features that will drive fire behavior. The fuel situation, the grass, the brush, the trees, sometimes the houses. We do what we can to mitigate fuels. On the county side, we work hard to support the evacuation corridors, but think big picture. Look at like the backcountry areas and these fires marching their way west towards the more populated areas. A lot of those areas just aren't going to change. You can go in there and bulldoze everything, but number one, that's not really what folks want. We like the beauty of it all, but number two, it's all going to come back as something. So if we get rid of all the brush, it comes back as invasive weed, and then that's going to carry fire. So we do what we can to mitigate around structures and about things we care about, like evacuation corridors, but that fuel component's always going to be there. That makes us driven or really focus on the weather. So on the fire department side, that's something we do every day is we sit down with the guys and gals at the fire station and go over the weather for that day. That is going to drive fire behavior. So I just came back from LA. I was up there since day one of the fire, helping with information, public information on that. That was a situation where you had these things coming together. So the hills of Malibu, notorious for burning, have a lot of fire issues. A lot of slopes, right? A lot of areas where that fire can take advantage. You have the fuel situation. Even though it doesn't seem like it, there's a lot of brush around that area, and once it gets established, the fuel becomes the houses. The situation there was such that as we saw out in Hawaii, as we saw in the Marshall Fire out in Colorado a few years back, it turned from a brush problem into a conflagration where the houses are what are catching each other on fire. Houses on fire put out so much heat and so much energy that it's essentially a blowtorch pointing in whatever direction the wind's pointing. The wind was pointing that blowtorch, pushing through these communities, and it gets to the point where you have millions and millions of embers flying through the air and pelting against these structures. Any kind of vulnerability is going to be a challenge. So topography, fuel situation, the weather situation we know was bad that day, right? That wind topping out, peaking at 99 miles an hour up there at the time, untenable, and really it becomes a point. You got to really think about it like any other natural disaster, a hurricane situation where you could have all the firefighters in the world out there. It doesn't mean that they're going to change the situation. The focus is life safety, getting people out of harm's way and all that stuff. Going back one slide to talk about the wildfire impacts and how this relates back to your situation. Rex in one of the other classes we do talks about a time wedge. And when we have a fire, let's say there's a fire in San Marcos and you're over here, there's a time wedge and you got to figure out where you're at on that wedge. How far is this fire? What's the situation? What way is the wind pushing this fire? And how soon can it affect me? Everything starts to go down quickly as that fire makes its way towards you. So the folks who are trying to decide whether or not they're going to evacuate or not need to start making decisions, right? Okay, well, I'm not in the evacuation order or the warning, but I'm close by. Okay, so I'm gonna stand by for now and see what happens. Okay, now I'm in the evacuation warning. I waited until I was in the warning, and now I'm going to take action. That's a decision, and that is ultimately what we're telling folks is like, hey, if you're in the warning, that's the time to really start making that decision. For me, I don't want to be stuck behind the hundreds of other people who are trying to now get on the road. I don't want to have to deal with the visibility issues. I don't want to have to deal with trying to protect my airway because the air has now gotten smoky. So you have all these things start to work against you the longer you wait. The biggest one for me is the traffic. Anybody who's ever been part of an evacuation knows that there are no thoroughfares that are built to get the amount of people that we need to get out, and that's why we section out our evacuation warnings and orders. If we do evacuation order for all of Escondido, it's going to turn into a nightmare and then nobody's going to get out. But what I'm telling you is that you need to make a decision for yourself and figure out what you're willing to accept as far as risk when it comes to getting out there. I like the going and getting a meal thing because usually we put these fires out and it works out okay. Most of the fires that we have, we stop 10 acres or less and we evacuate folks, we put the fire out, we get the power lines out of the road and get stuff back in service. Not we, our partners at SDG&E, but we get the area relatively safe and then we get you back in. Repopulation is a massive deal. It's what I spent the majority of my time doing on the Palisades because once the smoke clears, people are not interested in hearing about why they can't be at their homes. It's a really tricky balance trying to get people back in and paint the picture for them and let them know, hey, we're not trying to make it perfect, but we need to make sure you're not going to die going back out to your community to try and get home. So it's a struggle for us. All that to say, repopulation is a really big deal. We take it very serious. We want to get you back in your homes, but please leave the area when something is happening so we can get there and work. We don't have to worry about trying to save your life. So some big things and some big takeaways here. We focus a lot on defensible space, clearing that brush around your property, so making sure that you have that 100 feet of defensible space. I'm gonna leave you with two big priority items. Number one, the vents. The vent situation is a massive deal. We know that in 03 and 07 out here, most of the homes burned down after the main flame front. They were burning down or they were far away from the main flame front. It's that ember cast. It's what's burning down these structures. It's not this flame just laying down on these houses and having the houses burst into flames. That ember cast is a really big deal, and it gets into your vents and crawl spaces because a lot of people don't have reinforced vents. They have ember resistant vents, and you can change the meshing on yours. A lot of people with older houses have the 1/4 inch, 1/8 or 1/16 does a better job keeping embers out. And Denise is an expert when it comes to vent replacement because she's been working really hard on all that stuff. So please talk to her after and get the tips. But when it comes to retrofitting your house, there are some things that are really expensive, right? Like boxing in your eaves, the exposed eaves. That would not be first on my list because it's super expensive and there are other vulnerabilities that are a lot bigger deal, and vents is one of those really big deals. The second part I'll say is the 0 to 5 feet, what they call zone 0, what we call zone 0, right up against your structure, that is a really big deal as well. So if you have a bunch of vegetation that's up against the side of your house, if you have wood stacked across there, anything that creates that entry point for that flame going into your structure or holding heat against your structure is something that you want to address. So really focus on, it can be overwhelming to think about like home hardening and defensible space stuff. So think about, how do I clear that 5 feet around my structure to make sure that I'm not causing any major issues, and what can I do about the vulnerabilities on my structure to make sure that I'm not allowing those embers to take advantage of it. It's important to note that not every fire is the Palisades fire or the Cedar fire or the Witch fire or the Cocos fire. Your home, even if you do everything in those types of environments, sometimes things just aren't going to work out. What you want to do is protect yourself for the 95+% of fires where they stay relatively small and your house and your property has a fighting chance if you do the right thing. That's really what you want to protect yourself against. And you want to make sure that if fire is all around you and you don't have the opportunity to evacuate, that you have a place where you can ride out that main flame front. A lot of folks who are dying in these fires are dying either because they chose not to evacuate or they didn't get the notifications, and they're dying either in their home or very close to it because they realized, I'm in trouble, they try to bail, it's too late, or they didn't even realize what was happening and their structure wasn't hardened enough to take the flame front. Those homes aren't just going to burst into flames when a fire blows through. If you've done your work to harden your home, you should be able to ride out that main flame front of the majority of fires, and then make a decision on, okay, do I need to leave? Is there a portion of my house that's on fire and now I need to evacuate, but at least I survived the flame front? Do I have a vehicle that's out there that can still run, or how do I, you start making your decisions after that, but it at least gives you a fighting chance.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I knew a couple, kind of an older couple that were more in towards the Alcohol area where they lived, so it was a little more rural kind of living, and they had a swimming pool, and the fire came and engulfed their whole area. They ended up jumping in the pool, and they say that's what saved their life, is just being able to survive in the pool until the fire was able to get stopped, but the house burned down and everything.
So I'm glad you brought that up, and Rex actually does a whole case study thing talking about swimming pools in the Last Chance Survival course. The interesting thing about pools is, number one, most folks, if they're jumping in their pool and they have a house right there, the house is going to be the better bet because you can protect your airway. Most people who are dying from the smoke inhalation factor, or at least being taken out by the smoke inhalation factor, because they're not able to protect their airway. In a swimming pool, you can't protect your airway. So if you think about the typical property, the fire is usually not so intense that you would be burning to death. You have to be able to protect your airway. Some of the news stories and stuff that come out on the swimming pool front make it sound like they survived by jumping in the pool, when the reality is that they would have survived not jumping in the pool because it wasn't hot enough to burn them, if that makes sense. So the biggest thing is protecting the airway, and being in an enclosed space like a vehicle or a home is going to be a better bet than being outside or being in your pool where you're not able to protect your airway, if that makes sense. For go bags, we talked about this a little bit, but have that go bag ready to go. And on the airway front, that's one of the biggest things that people forget. Fortunately, unfortunately, most everybody has an N95 mask now, or it has some sort of mask to protect their airway. So if you have to go from your home to your vehicle, if you have to go from your vehicle to somewhere else safe, you're at least able to protect your airway, and that's going to be the biggest thing. The fuel to charge vehicle is another big thing. Every fire we have, folks are running out of fuel, and they're jeopardizing the evacuation routes for other people. It's important to remember that these are community events, and the decisions of individuals can affect everybody. So anybody who saw the dozens of cars lined up while they were exiting the Pacific Palisades trying to leave, all it took was those first cars panicking and ditching their cars, and now everybody else is stuck behind them regardless of whether they want to be or not. So I'm not questioning the decisions they made, but I will say those cars were not burned up, which means that they may not have been able to see where they were going, and that's a situation. But jumping out of a controlled airspace in your vehicle and going out on foot and then abandoning your car in the middle of the road and blocking emergency services and everybody else behind you may not have been the best tactical move. Again, easy for me to say when I'm going in after the fact and saying, what the heck happened? But anybody who saw the video afterwards, they had to bring in a fire bulldozer to push those cars out of the way because they couldn't get any fire trucks up and down, and it was a major thoroughfare. So remember that other people can affect your plan. You may have the best plan ever, and you're like, hey, this is great. We're 2 blocks from the ocean. We're going to make it to Pacific Coast Highway, and suddenly you come to a stop because other people have abandoned your cars, and now you have to move to Plan C and figure out what you're going to do.
Thomas?
Yeah.
2 things on the go back. Having been through the 03 and 07 evacuations, don't ever let your gas tank get below half.
That's what we tell people.
Yeah, it's because, and I stress take cash, a lot of cash, because a lot of places are out of power, they can't take credit card because the bank isn't. Credit cards have very little use.
Oh yeah.
Unless you really get, go to Arizona or something, but, yeah, make sure you have fuel and cash.
Yeah, it's a big deal, and even I hate to keep bringing up LA, but it's fresh in my mind. The 3 closest gas stations on the PCH were all closed because none of them had power, and so even for us on the fire department side, it takes a while to get the fuel trucks out there and get them cycling through. I had been driving for a couple days and going on the PCH because we had power lines down and all this stuff. It wasn't a great way to go, and to go around took hours that I didn't have. And so you start to realize, even though I showed up with a full tank of gas, I started to get in that situation where I was like, I hope they somehow bring this fuel truck in from God knows where, because I'm starting to run out of options here. And you do start to realize all the things you take for granted, like having a gas station available all the time, having credit cards that work everywhere. A lot of fiber line burned up on that fire, so service, even just regular phone service, was almost non-existent. I carry a Starlink in my truck and was trying to set it up, and Starlinks were blowing over all over the place because the wind was so crazy, and I'm just like, oh boy. So eventually now I have it on my dash, which is, my car is too small to have a giant panel in there, but you start to realize all the things that usually worked out for you don't work out on these fires, and that's why it's important to make sure that you have a plan and that you stay flexible and that you stay resilient and you don't give up on yourself, because a lot of people get to that point where they get frustrated and they're like, well, I'm just screwed and this is it. And that's one of the biggest things we kind of push, is you have to have that tactical mindset that you're going to keep pushing forward. You're going to come up with the next plan, because plan A, B, and C are just not working out for you. So when it comes to evacuation, figure out what your situation is. If you have time to research. There's a lot of good options out there, a lot of good technology options, and technology is an option. If it's not, you're going to have to do the old-fashioned way of actually getting out, looking, figuring out where the fire's at and how that relates to you, and just doing your best to collect that information. AM 600 Kogo is a good partner of ours, and they're always pushing that information out. I have multiple radios in my house that have the hand crank and the solar and stuff like that, so that's always a good option. AM is one of the will be one of the last standing when things are going down, and we saw that during the earthquakes in LA, where the system had completely failed except for AM, where they were broadcasting that message. So it's a big deal to have that backup plan. Hopefully you'll never have to get to that point, but have a plan. Monitor everything, grab your go bag, stay clear of hazards. Easier said than done sometimes, but look at where the hazards are when it comes to a wildland fire. If you have a chance to be in a parking lot like this versus somewhere near the brush, choose that. Choose the clearest, widest option. When it comes to earthquakes, realize that these big buildings crumble. You want to stay out of the collapse zone. Stay in these, any kind of parking lot area is typically going to be the safest area for you to be. Talked about evacuation order and warning. I don't know why the end came down like that. It's kind of weird, but immediate threat to life and property. What we do is we figure out where the situation is. So let's use a fire as an example. We have evacuation order covering the fire perimeter and the immediate area that we expect it to go. We then build evacuation warning area around that buffer, because after the initial push, we don't ever want anybody to go from nothing to evacuation order. So we try to prep people, hey, evacuation order, evacuation warning as a buffer, and then if that fire keeps creeping, we turn that warning into an order, and then we build out another layer of evacuation warning area. That's really where Jeff's team comes into play. We're making those decisions down on the incident itself with fire and law enforcement, and then working with our emergency operations center to push that stuff out through the wireless emergency alerts, through the reverse 911 system, which is Alert San Diego, and giving you the best information we can. Again, there is a time lag. There's a natural time lag from us getting to the incident, making those decisions, all that. So we want you to be ready to make a decision for yourself. Don't ever wait for the government to tell you that you need to evacuate. You need to be able to make those decisions for yourself, especially early on in an incident where things are so dynamic and changing so quickly that we don't always get the technology side to you before it's time to go, and sometimes that means that the fire is surrounding you before you have a chance to evacuate. Shelter in place, Jeff talked about earlier, but that could be a variety of things. We had a fire a few months ago where we actually opted to shelter people in place because there was one way out and it was clogged with fire stuff. They had great clearance. They were newer homes with good construction, and so we kept them there because we knew that we had the resources to protect around them, and it worked out good. This could also be an active shooter situation, a hazmat situation, some sort of situation where it's safer for you to stay there. Sometimes we'll do that with the schools because the schools have a lot of hardscape around them, and evacuating a bunch of children is very complicated. So it's sometimes safer to stack them with fire equipment to make sure that's protected on the property, and then keep them in place to keep them safe. Leave you with some action items. So make sure that you've done everything you can so that your family has a plan. It's great. A lot of us are leaders in our family, and the rest of the family is kind of like laissez-faire about emergency stuff. At least I don't want to speak for you guys, but for me, it's a tough sell sometimes to get people motivated. So make sure that they have a plan, because you may not all be together, and you want to make sure that your family's not going into panic mode if you're not there to lead the charge. Have a go bag we talked about. Download the apps. SD Emergency is what's connected to that reverse 911. They will have the chronological updates for these fires, so it's really helpful to have that. It's helpful to get that information. You get it even if you're not in the area, and that's why it's different than the wireless emergency alerts. The SDG alerts site is great, and a quick plug for SDG&E. They also have SDGE weather, which is incredible, and you can go to sdgeweather.com. It's a great synthesized version of what's going on for that day. It's really meant for their employees out on the line to know what the weather's doing, but they have their own meteorologists. They do a great job breaking it down for for us lay people and really knowing, oh, okay, that's what the weather's looking like for today. So awesome. And then as talked about before, Watch Duty is really a collection point of information. They're not creating original content. They're gathering stuff from the internet to try and make it one collection point and digestible for folks. So even though it's not a government-sponsored app, it can be helpful in painting a picture for what's going on. If a fire gets established on the CAL FIRE side, we'll update stuff at fire.ca.gov. We'll have all the incident updates, and that's where it includes shelter information, both animal and human, has evacuation maps, it has all that stuff. So if we have a big fire in the county, it's likely that it'll include CAL FIRE in some way, and then we'll keep the website updated on that front. Be resourceful and looking into stuff, and you guys are doing it good here, learning and absorbing as much as possible. So I appreciate your time. I know there's a lot that we could cover and that we have covered, but yes, go ahead.
I have a question regarding the fire hydrants. So I live off of Murray Lane, so it's a cul-de-sac. And the street's pretty narrow, but we do have 2 fire hydrants, one on the corner by Park Ridge and then one right across from my house, basically. How do we know that they're been tested and we won't have any issues? And can the fire trucks actually come up? It's such a narrow road with no sidewalks, come up and actually use that space if there's
Yeah, so they'll be able to do it. I'm not sure how the testing process works in Escondido, but this is a different situation than we have in some of our backcountry areas, like Julian and like some of those areas where those areas would experience something similar to the Palisades, where it's running off of a limited supply. In Escondido, you're not going to have as bad of a situation. Yes, there's still, it's not going to be indefinite, but there was a lot of water issue talk on the last one, and it's going to be a challenge in those areas. As far as Jeff, do you know about the hydrant?
Yeah,
testing?
I was going to mention that. So if your water provider is Escondido City, right? Those fire hydrants are inspected by our Public Works Department. They go through every single one every year. If you have a concern about a fire hydrant, reach out to Public Works and let them know you have a concern with it. If you have the reported app, you can take a picture of it, and that'll go in, and you'll actually get responses back from Public Works about what the status is. If you have the Rincon del Diablo water district, you'll need to reach out to Rincon and ask them, because they check those fire hydrants as well. So they're all checked regularly. They're all pressurized, checked regularly. So if for some reason you think there's something wrong with one or it's leaking, reach out to one of those groups and
Yeah, we just wasn't sure because our homes are up on the top of the mountain pretty much, and then we have 1 acre, 2 acre lots, and some of the lots haven't been properly maintained, or we've cleared all the time. But we were just wondering, it's like, do we put in tanks as a kind of a backup in case, store water or something in case there is an emergency? Because fire climate doesn't seem to be going away, right?
You could, but that money, you're looking at $10,000 or $20,000 probably to get tanks installed professionally, and that money could be spent more effectively hardening your home from something else.
Okay.
And I will add, if you're concerned about a lot that has a lot of weeds that aren't being grown, again, use the reported app. Go to our fire prevention folks, and they'll come out, and if it's a fire danger, they'll actually request that they have it removed. They have like 30 days. If they don't clean up in 30 days, then we come out and we get it cleaned up and we bill them for it.
Okay.
So by all means, take a picture of it, use the reported app. It goes into a database. Someone's going to look at it. Someone's going to report back to you about what we're doing.
Okay, good.
Thomas, can I add a story about the municipal water systems? Particularly, like you mentioned, there was a lot of talk in the Palisades fire about the hydrant system failing. So when I was 19, I lived in an old house that was in college that was built in the 1920s. And there was 5 of my best friends from high school that lived there. It had 1 bathroom, old plumbing, and then, there was like 2 sinks. And when our favorite roommate, Ethan, would go take a shower, everyone would go turn on the hot water all at once. And then everyone would go turn on the cold water. We hear him go, ah! We hear him screaming. So we were changing the pressure inside those pipes. So think about, as all of these houses burn down, the bath fixtures snap off. The the toilet fixture snapped off. Now all of these houses are bleeding out. So there's no, even if you had infinity amount of gallons, there's no way that the pressure could keep up with the volume, because pressure and volume have basically an inverse relationship. So as that volume of the water leaving the system, the pressure just can't keep up with it. So the hydrants, there was never any chance, no matter how good the water system was. I hope that this dispels some things.
The houses that we have sprinkler systems inside the house that were built 20 years ago, and I guess it was part of the construction standards. But we never had them tested. We were just wondering, like, does that water just stay in there, and then if there's a fire, it goes off, or
Depends if it's a wet or a dry system, and if it can operate completely independently of everything else. So is it pressurized by the municipal system? Because if that goes down, then it won't work. If you have a pump that's on a generator in your own water tank that would turn on when it needed to, then it could work.
So how can I find that out then?
I would call a fire sprinkler company and ask them.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's been 20 years, like with like no maintenance or anything like that, then it might be time to just have them come out and they can teach you a little bit about your system, but also do some testing. And I was at a different talk in Escondido a couple months back, and they had sprinkler guys there talking, and people were like, "Well, dude, like, is there a hard set, like inspected every year, every 5 years, every 10 years?" And the guy's answer was not never. So don't never exactly, but they don't have any like hard fast like you have to do it this often. But I'd say 20 years is probably a good time to evaluate and make sure everything's good to go.
I may be jumping ahead. The barricade jump. Have you found that to be effective on mobile homes, like the lateral fire?
So there's a few things that go with any kind of gel. Number one, what their effectiveness is as far as time lag goes, because what we don't want is people hanging out longer than they should because they're gelling their house. A lot of times the barricade gel is sealing up vulnerabilities that you could probably handle ahead of time, and then you won't. I mean, that barricade gel it's not that it's not effective. It's just that there's a lot of other things that you can do. It's expensive. It has a shelf life, all that stuff, and you have to either apply it or leave it out and hope that a fire engine comes by and they have time to apply it. For the lilac fire, that wasn't the case. We didn't, we weren't going to have the resources to make that happen, and so I don't think it's like inherently a bad idea, but there's other vulnerabilities that the barricade gel isn't going to help with, like the vent situation. So if you have old vents on there and you're spraying the gel, it's not going to keep those embers from going into the vent spaces and causing issues. I think it's probably a better investment to put that money towards doing it. And I know it's harder with like with RVs, double wides, mobile homes. It is harder to seal up. They are more vulnerable to stuff like that. Fires do spread quicker with those types of structures. But the barricade gel, it's definitely more of a like personal preference type thing, but it has to be the right scenario for everything to come together and have it be effective, I guess I should say. Yes.
We get a lot of questions from people on should we put sprinklers on our roof? And I've heard different answers to whether that makes sense or whether it doesn't make sense.
So the roof situation is interesting because if you have a fire-rated Class A roof, which a lot of people have, you shouldn't need sprinklers on your roof. The fire a lot of times it's not penetrating your roof to get into your house. It's going through other means, through the eaves, through the vents, through rotting wood. It's channeling it in areas like by the front door where people have gaps. It's going into the garages, stuff like that. So it's one of those things almost like barricade gel where it's just like, okay, like, yeah, one of the first things that goes is the power. So number one, like how is this being pumped up to the roof to begin with, unless they have backup power. But number two, you're just putting a bunch of water on something that shouldn't be vulnerable to begin with.
Well, I shouldn't say in most cases, but a lot of them, feel that if there's sprinklers on the roof, it'll keep the fire away from the house. So it's spraying all your yard or, canyon behind you or whatever, and it'll keep the fire away from your house.
It's pretty amazing how quickly fire can dry things out. So you can, it's almost like when we do the wet downs for the helicopters. We think we're putting like a ton of water and then it comes down. And I used to work in Ocotillo Wells where we're trying to wet down the sand, and it lasts about 90 seconds. And then once the helicopter comes and the rotor wash and you have the sun beating down, like everything's gone. It's kind of like that with wildland fire. Like that moisture will buy you a little bit, but it's not going to be the end all be all. And going back to the conflagration situation, if you have multiple structures on fire next to it, the ground being moist is not going to change anything. Another one of those investments that's relatively expensive, and I think people could probably put that money into doing some other home hardening stuff.
That confirms us telling them no, don't bother.
So that's my recommendation. But I'm not saying blacklist it and it's a terrible thing. I'm just saying I don't think that's necessarily the right.
Wetting your yard down and wetting your roof down is great, but embers travel a mile. So a wet front yard is not going to do anything for preventing embers from coming in from anywhere.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily soaking your whole house and all that stuff, and it's tough. It's something where, and it's one of the reasons that a lot of people will choose to stay against the better advice, and they'll risk their lives trying to stick it out because they think with a garden hose they'll be able to capture anything, and that's sometimes people get lucky and that works out okay for them, and then they get a little more pep in their step and they're like, yeah, I've survived 6 fires with this, and it's like not quite. There were a lot of things going in your favor that worked out, and it's like not wearing your seatbelt. Like, yeah, you survived without your seatbelt because you didn't crash, but eventually that's not going to work out for you, and you're taking a gamble every time.
Yeah, isn't that taking away from resources that firefighters need too, right?
Certainly, yeah. There's not infinite resources, and so when you have water just draining out everywhere, you're certainly not necessarily helping the community, the overall community situation either. So that is a struggle.
I have a question about the zero zone part of this. My understanding is that chaparral and native plants can reduce the they can be a deterrent to the fire. They can help stop it. And so I'm don't fully understand the zero zone when you have those types of plants on your property. And to make this more complicated, the CAL FIRE insurance plan people are telling people in my area to get rid of all the chaparral that's there, and now it's just dirt, which I think can conduct fire much quicker than the chaparral would. So I don't understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and if you could explain all this, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. So any kind of vegetation against your house is going to hold in heat. It's going to potentially catch embers, even if it's well irrigated. We've been on a gajillion fires where we see cactus melted and aloe. Everything can burn. It burns to a different rate. So if you have low-growing herbaceous plants or whatever, no, it's not going to hold in heat as much as having brush against your place. But going back to the chaparral part, slowing down fire, if you have plants that are well irrigated and spaced out and stuff like that, then no, it's not going to carry fire up. But anybody who's up against the Cleveland National Forest or anything where there is a bunch of chaparral will tell you that stuff will certainly carry fire with some extreme flame lengths, bringing it right up to their property line. So if you have brush up against your house, even if it's well irrigated, it's still going to catch embers. It's still going to potentially hold in that heat factor. And the reality is that a lot of people have plants that aren't exactly 100%, healthy and doing good. And so when it comes to the FAIR plan, it's not connected to CAL FIRE. all the different insurance companies pay into the FAIR plan to have that be a insurer of last resort. But what they have found through their studies is that having a clear buffer at that 5 feet is not going to carry fire as much. And so while it's ugly, it's not going to have. There's nothing there. If you have decomposed granite, or even if it's hardscape, like my house actually is kind of good for the zone 0 situation because the sidewalk's right up against the house, so I don't have anywhere to plant anything right there. But the embers can take advantage of vulnerabilities on my siding, but there's nothing there that's going to be able to hold the heat in. So like when we show up in a fire engine during like any kind of fire event, our first thing is to start prepping the house, and the first thing we do is start yarding stuff away from the side of the house, because anything that's right next to your house is going to hold in heat, and that's where people like to store a lot of stuff. They'll have like lumber stacked up across, and a lot of people still have their firewood piles there, and even the stuff you wouldn't necessarily think, like the plastic, like furniture. When you have millions of embers like flying in it and it's hot, that fire will burn anything and everything. And so if you clear it of all materials, then it's going to give you a better chance of that flame not impinging your structure.
It's better than, I understand clearing of that stuff, but dirt is a slower conductor than chaparral? I don't really?
I mean, the dirt's just, there's nothing for the fire to really burn. So if you look at like our desert communities, like we have fires in the desert, but that fire really has to hopscotch from plant to plant. There's nothing in the soil that's really going to carry that fire forward.
Thank you.
A question regarding materials. When they were showing some of the houses, they were saying, the chimneys survived, some of the block structures survived. Is there, I guess, interest in trying to create more materials that are more fireproof that we can be using?
Yeah, and the codes keep improving, and so you look at the Paradise area up from the campfire. Those homes are going to do really well in the next fire. The areas rebuilt in the Palisades are going to do really well in the next fire because the codes keep improving, and they have a lot of regulations where even though these homes were 10, 15, 20 million dollars, that doesn't mean that they had all the latest and greatest retrofits on their home to keep them safe. And so now these homes will be built, a lot of them will be sealed up completely to where you don't have those vulnerabilities that's built there right now. So there have been changes in the code, and I'm not the expert in all the little changes that have happened lately, but I do know that they're going to be built better and stronger. And as far as like the building materials, they can still use like regular building materials, but really it comes down to what the outside, like how sealed up the outside is going to be. And you have materials like doing stucco siding, where you imagine the embers hitting the stucco siding, and unless your stucco is falling apart, like it does pretty good. So where it looks for is the changes in the angle. Okay, well, where the stucco comes up, like are the pieces that are missing where that ember can then get in there and cause issues. And for the newer construction, that's not going to be an issue. They're going to have that stuff shored up. So, but a lot of energy and time and research going into that kind of stuff, especially by the insurance companies, because they have to keep losing money.
That's the reason when you see something like that, the economic impact has been enough to create a change in the politics. The driver for all this stuff is economics.
One of the things I'd like to mention is the Fire Safe Council here in Escondido works with the Escondido Fire Department and others to look at alternate materials and get approvals for alternate materials. And we keep abreast on home hardening and abatement practices to help you. So please use us as a resource for finding those kind of things out. Can we hear it for Thomas Schutz, please, from Cal Fire?